So that's it for the first pillar, that is to say important agreements which have been made and then important implementation that we should see to it as we prepare for the G20 summit in Seoul. Moving on to my second pillar, which is new issues. Well, you'd have noticed that I emphasize limited number of new issues. The reason why I intentionally put the emphasis on the limited number of new issues is because in G20 there is a wide-held view that we should be very, very careful in introducing new issues to the G20 process. Why? Because if G20 agrees on a large number of things and do not deliver on those agreements, then soon enough we will be losing the credibility. Soon enough it will develop itself into many of not so successful international processes where we have made the same mistake again and again. So for the time being, that consensus is there. But even then, in Korea, we thought, at the very least, we should be introducing two issues. And then those two issues, I have to tell you this, are based upon our national experiences as a rapidly developing economy. So the first one of them is something called global financial safety net. And then what we wish to do is, what we wish to see through that issue is this, which is that at the beginning of the financial crisis in 2008, Korea had no less than $260 billion of foreign reserves, which was about 30% of Korea's GDP. And then we thought it was large enough. But at the end of the day, we came to find it was not. It was not large enough, which made us to think that maybe on top of independent security we are trying to provide through the foreign reserves, we must have stronger collective security to be provided through a multilateral system like the IMF or through regional system like what you have in Europe as well as what we have in East Asia in the form of Chiangmai Initiative. The second new issue that we wanted to introduce, again based upon our national experiences, was development. And then for development, there are a large number of important efforts being made in the global community. For example, there is MDG, there is G8-sponsored efforts, etc., etc. But thinking about MDG, what does MDG stand for? It stands for Millennium Development Goals, and then it is just goals. And then what we thought in Korea, and then this is something we try to share with other members of the G20, goals are laudable, but at the same time, what about the means? If those goals could be achieved and maintained in a sustainable manner, then developing economies should be provided with the means through which that goal could continue to be maintained. And then it was for that reason that we decided in Korea that maybe we should be putting more emphasis on economic growth of developing countries, and then both these issues, that is to say global financial net as well as development, we shared our views with other G20 member countries, and then they heartily agreed that they are the kind of issues on which G20 should be focusing. And then for that reason, in Toronto, we agreed to set up two working groups, one on financial safety net, one on development, and then by Seoul Summit, we wish to come up with concrete outcomes for those two issues. Moving on to the last pillar, which is outreach. As I've already told you, it was the firm belief of my president that we should be reaching out to the non-G20 member countries. Yesterday, there was a question coming from the audience, and then it was, when would Morocco be able to sit at the table of the G20? And then I, as has been introduced to you, am something called outreach ambassador for the G20 in Seoul. And then for that reason, I've been traveling extensively. And then I have a joke, which is that if you come and visit those non-G20 member countries, there are 172 different reasons why those countries should be present at the G20 table. But at the same time, that is not practical in the sense that within the G20, there is a feeling that 20 is already too many. So between those 172 countries who wish to have a seat at the G20, and G20 countries who think the 20 is already too many, we have to fill the gap. And then we thought maybe appointing outreach ambassador and then making him travel to all those non-G20 member countries may be one of the best ways to deal with this expectation of non-G20 member countries. So for the past 2 months, I've been traveling really, really extensively. I went to Chile, Santiago, to meet with representatives of Rio Group, to Addis Ababa to meet with representatives of African Union, to Cairo to meet with Arab League, to Vietnam to meet with ASEAN leaders, to Helsinki to meet with 8 countries of Nordic countries, to Moscow to meet with CIS representatives, etc., etc. And then I have to tell you this, which is that it was a very, very enriching experience. And then it was enriching for me as we prepare for the G20 summit in Seoul, but at the same time, it was an enriching experience collectively for the G20 as well. So what I'm planning to do is this, which is that I'm planning to write a report, file a report, end of this year, and then try to share it with the French presidency in 2011, as well as Mexican presidency in 2012, so that we will continue with these efforts of explaining to non-G20 member countries about what G20 is about, but more importantly, getting their views reflected in the G20 process. Finally, I was listening to Jim, as well as Samir, and then what they said was the balance between legitimacy and effectiveness. And then that, in fact, is a very important question, which is very high on the minds of G20 leaders as well. And then what we think is this, which is that at the end of the day, legitimacy may be something which will be very difficult for the G20 to claim. Why? Because there was no explicit mandate being provided to the G20 member countries. But at the same time, this is something which we can make up through being more effective. And then I think there is a serious question about how to define effectiveness. And in my mind, I think there should be 2 different kinds of effectiveness. First of all, G20 should continue to deliver. That way it will be effective. But at the same time, that delivery would be not only in view of the national interests of the G20 countries around the table, it would have to be the delivery which would reflect the interests of the global community at large, 192 of all of them. So that is the way we look upon the relationship between G20 and other non-G20 member countries, as well as other international organizations. And then that way, we very much hope that through the Seoul Summit, we will be able to make a contribution to the G20 process so that it will come out as a credible addition to the universe of all those institutions for global governance. Thank you so much.